moment that happens for a lot of us as leaders, and it's easy to miss how important it is. Someone from your team comes to you with a question. It's not necessarily a crisis. It may not even be that complicated. But before you even had a chance to think about it, you give the answer. And again, and again, and again. You keep moving, the day keeps moving, but something starts to stick in your mind, this quiet thought that asks this question: why do they keep coming to me for everything? Don, the number of times I've heard this complaint from leaders that we work with, it feels like there's a line always outside of my door of people who just need me to solve their problems, answer their questions. So if that's you, you're in good company. And the truth is, there's usually an underlying fear for us as leaders kind of behind this. If I stop answering, things are going to slow down. If I don't step in and solve this problem, then something's going to get missed. And honestly, for a lot of us, we think if I just sort this out, everything will be easier and we can keep moving forward.
That's right. And yes, I weekly, multiple times a week, am dealing with this same problem with our clients. And what makes this issue so sneaky is, on the surface, it can feel like you're being a good leader, right? We're being helpful. We're being available to our team. We're keeping things moving. The good news is, when we do this, nothing breaks, nothing blows up. But over time, we start to feel it. And over time, some resentment starts to grow. And this is where people come to us in their calls and they're like, why am I babysitting these people? Shouldn't they have figured this out by now?
Yeah.
There's a heaviness involved in being involved in everything. That's why we've created a team, so that we don't have to be involved in everything. But that sense of, there's a team lined up outside my door waiting for me to solve everything, and they can't move without me, starts to weigh us down. And the question that this begs is, how did I get here? How did I end up with this reality that I've now have to exist inside of? So Eric, what's your answer to that? How did we get here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal question, because I've had to ask myself that question many times.
Yeah.
And I think, in previous episodes, we've talked about that for some of us, we can fall into the kind of control freak nature. And we just want to micromanage everybody and tell everybody what to do because it's a control feature. But I think in this episode, we're tackling more the other side of, like, when we actually do want to be helpful. Like you said, we want to be available to our team. We want to help them solve the problems that they're confronting, because we think that's what good leadership is. And there are times, let's be honest, when there is a good reason for us to step in, answer a quick question, solve a problem, help somebody move forward, get unstuck. But if we're not careful, if that becomes our default mode of engaging the questions, challenges that our team members are facing, we can get ourselves into a long-term difficult situation that we're going to come back to. But I think it's exactly because as leaders, we are capable. Right? We do know the answers. We have figured stuff out. We've had to solve lots of problems. We've built a reputation for being reliable. I mean, how many of the leaders we've talked to complain about how their team members don't seem to know how to solve problems, figure things out for themselves. Yeah. They don't have the ability to pivot or to recalibrate in the midst of the challenges that they're facing. And so when we as leaders ask questions, it feels, or when people ask us questions, it feels natural just to respond, right? There's no different than in parenting. Our kids ask us a question, we just give them the answer. Yep. So, and over time, like I said, a pattern begins to form. And it's not because our team is lazy, but because we as leaders have quietly become the place where their certainty exists.
Yeah. That's so good. And when certainty exists with us as the leader, responsibility tends to migrate there too. That's the thing that we need to be careful of. So when this happens, we as leaders start to feel overwhelmed. Not in an obvious way, though. because what we tend to interpret it as initially is not I'm overwhelmed, not I've created this problem for myself, but this is a problem with my team. They're not ready. They need more confidence. They need to figure it out. They need more experience, right? Just a feature of being human is we tend to point the finger out before we realize, oh, everywhere I go, there I am. I've actually created this problem for myself. So we have actually trained them to depend on us by how we respond. How do we shift this dynamic once we are becoming aware of this reality? In fact, the problem is me.
Yeah. Well, this is what I would consider maybe a slightly more nuanced leadership difficulty, but also growth edge that I think we all need to kind of reflect on and process, because we're going to find it not just in the workplace, but as parents and in a lot of other spaces. When someone brings us a question, it's easy to interpret that moment as simply an opportunity to give an answer. That's the default. But it rarely is, right? At first, these moments appear just to be another opportunity to solve the problem and help people move forward. But in reality, these are the patterns of engagement that we fall into that are actually robbing our team or the people that we're leading from an even greater opportunity, which is their own growth and development. And just like in parenting, there's nothing wrong with helping our kids until we realize that they're not learning the necessary skills and abilities to solve their own problems, to overcome their own challenges, to figure out life for themselves. And I think this is where we get stuck as leaders. If I step in too much, then maybe I'm over functioning, I'm becoming a control freak, and I'm micromanaging. If I step back too much, have I abandoned them? Have I left them in a lurch? And so what we're really talking about is learning to live in the lane or the tension between these two extreme responses, right? And so the shift here isn't about not giving answers. It's about recognizing that development requires a different kind of leadership posture, one that stays engaged, but doesn't try to resolve the tension too quickly, right? Because growth happens in the tension. Let me say that one more time for our listeners. Growth happens in the tension. When we as leaders remove all uncertainty, right, by giving answers, solving the problems, we're removing that need for good judgment, good decision making. And really what's more important is ownership. People don't really feel ownership until they feel the full weight and responsibility to find a way forward. And over time, teams stop stretching or exercising these muscle groups. Like we said earlier, this just becomes the default. We've trained them. You come to me with a question, I got an answer or solution for you. And it's not because they can't learn this stuff or figure this stuff out, but because the environment doesn't require it of them.
Oh, yes. And this is where, we can all easily point out the error in the parenting ways when an 18-year-old is still having their laundry done for them, right? But you rewind to how these default patterns are created back to, I distinctly remember huddled on the floor trying to get my family out of the house. We're already on a time crunch, and my 5-year-old has to figure out how to tie their friggin' shoe, like, it's so much easier in that moment to just be like, just give it to me. I'll tie that shoe for you. We're out the door. Here we go. But to pause and to not only recalibrate your schedule, your expectations, but then to let your kid sit in the tension of struggling with learning how to do something new. Choosing that moment when they're 5 is the same, leads to you not having to do their laundry when they're 18. And it's the same for our teams. It's uncomfortable for us as leaders to make that shift when we are accustomed to making all the decisions, because watching somebody think in real time feels so slow. Watching somebody wrestle with having to make a decision when we can see it clearly feels really messy, and it certainly doesn't feel efficient.
Yeah, my mind is racing with so many examples, both in working with clients and in even with my own kids who are now, in their collegiate years, right? Where it's like they come home and they're processing a challenge they're facing when they're out at school, and you're just like, oh, I've been through that. I know how to solve that problem. I know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is a real tension, not just for the individual who might be invited into a space where they have to exercise these muscles, but also for the leader to slow down and to be patient with these moments, which I know for most of us as high achieving, high powered leaders, that can be really difficult.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about through the lens of this language. I wonder where sometimes we confuse efficiency with effectiveness. Right? So efficiency is all about getting things done in the quickest amount of time with the least amount of energy spent. But the process of human development, growth, development, transformation, actually builds capacity for tomorrow. So if we're choosing efficiency over and over and over again with our teams by solving problems and giving answers, we're robbing them of the opportunity to increase their capacity. We've talked about this before in other episodes, which actually not only increases their capacity, it increases the capacity of our entire team and even potentially our organization.
Correct. Long term,
right? And so when leaders always default to efficiency, how do I get this done in the fastest, quickest manner? We unintentionally, I think, cap our team's growth, right? We solve the problem, but we rob the moment. And we remove the very pressure that would have given our team members a chance to mature.
Yeah. So this begs the question, Eric, what do we do as leaders to start building this type of capacity when we recognize that we've been robbing the moment because we've been favoring efficiency? What are some changes that we can make?
Yeah. Well, definitely a mindset shift, right? Most of what we talk about on these episodes, we kind of identify a challenge that most of us resonate with at some level in some area of our life. And then we really have to understand the problem and maybe some of the systemic dynamics that are contributing to that problem. But more often than not, change begins with a mindset shift, right? We've seen the world or ourselves in a particular way. And so I want to encourage our listeners to consider the mindset shift we're about to step into. If we bring this down to kind of boots on the ground, right? What does this actually look like? Because this isn't about us as leaders disappearing, throwing people into the deep end and hoping they figure it out. That would be negligence. That would be abandonment. and we've seen that happen plenty of times with leaders we've worked with. And I'm certainly
not
guilty.
What we're advocating for here.
We are not advocating for that. That is not fun for anybody, especially the person who's drowning. So it's not about refusing to help. It's about practicing, like we said before, a different leadership posture, right? So the next time someone comes to us with a question, to recognize the opportunity, right? Not to be efficient, but to be more effective, and to choose to pause, not dramatically, not awkwardly, not to give them a hint that like, oh my gosh, how do you not know this? Why do I have to participate in this moment with you? But just long enough to interrupt our own default mechanisms toward efficiency. And I think to respond with curiosity rather than certainty, right? To create what's the phrase I hear all the time? The question loop. I don't remember I've heard some people use this phrase I really appreciate, like to create this sense of like, hey, there's a question mark and that's okay. There's uncertainty. That's okay. There's a problem to be solved. That's okay. There's a challenge we're facing.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's okay to be in this space and that we don't have to find the fastest, easiest, most immediate solution, but instead to consider practicing curiosity, asking some simple questions like, hey, help me understand, what do you think the problem is? And how do you understand or interpret this problem? By asking this question, we begin to understand the way that this other individual is perceiving the situation that they're in. Hey, help me understand. Have you thought through any possible solutions or responses? What do you think we should do in this situation? What do you think would be the most effective way forward? What are the options that you're seeing right now? Right. And I think what we're doing in that moment is subtle, but so incredibly powerful, because by doing that, we're communicating, number one, hey, I see you. I hear you. I value you. I see you in this sticky situation.
Yeah.
I care that you're in this situation. And I trust that you can participate in the solving of this problem, which is really, really valuable.
That's good. And I just want to take us back to that initial pause, because this comes up in so many of our episodes. The reason we talk and we encourage all of us to, when we are facing potentially significant moments, to pause. Yeah. It is because we are all wired with default responses. We have well-worn paths of how we react in various moments. And unless we are first able to capture ourselves, to pause, we are not ever going to be able to travel a new path. Mm-hmm. We are not ever going to be able to make new decisions. And so that I just want to encourage our listeners, if you're like, God, they're talking about pausing again. That pause is actually the key to making any sort of significant change in your life. So, and it's not about your team member. It's really about retraining ourselves, letting ourselves learn to sit in the discomfort without being able to jump in, without having to jump in with an immediate fix. And it's a really important moment.
I love that. And I think it's important to say this, that the goal isn't for them to solve the issue immediately, to magically, because we paused and gave them a moment and asked some questions, now they immediately have the right answer. Yeah. Right. The goal is for them to get comfortable in the uncomfortable. That's with right. The tension of wrestling with the problems. I remember, years ago, one of my favorite teachers in all of my schooling was my 8th grade pre-algebra teacher. Mm. And I can tell you, math was not my strong suit. And I remember more often than not sitting in that class just feeling like, is everybody else as lost as I am? I'm so confused. Needless to say, I was not scoring well on the quizzes each week. And so this teacher, one day holds me after class and says, hey, Eric, you're not doing real great on these quizzes. And I'm concerned that you're not understanding the material. And I remember thinking like, well, why do I need to understand it? You have all the answers and I'm not good at math and I'm never going to figure this out. And it doesn't make sense in my brain. And I had all these excuses. And she could have just easily been like, all right, maybe you're not going to be good at math. Maybe you're never going to figure this stuff out. Right. Or she could have just been like, all right, well, I'll give you the answers. But instead, she invited me, and I didn't have language for it then. I mean, I was probably, 12, 13 years old. Yeah. But I remember her inviting me and saying, hey, Eric, you can do this. You can learn this stuff, but it's going to require that you engage. And I'm not going to give you the answers, but here's what I will do. If you'll come for just a few of your lunch times and just sit with me and let's talk through these problems and let me help you ask the right questions. And then I'm just going to give you some guidance but she invited me into this tent. It was so uncomfortable because it made me feel stupid. And I felt like I was exposed for not being great at math. But it was this wonderful memory of her inviting me into the tension of being uncomfortable, of having to wrestle with the awkwardness of exercising my mind in ways that were unfamiliar and difficult. But here's what the amazing thing was, is that her willingness to spend that time with me radically boosted my confidence. It gave me fresh courage to begin to believe I can solve these problems. And I actually went on to do really well in that class. And then here's what was ironic, is that as I transitioned into my high school years, my mindset I went from I suck at math. I'm actually pretty good at math. And I ended up studying all the way through AP calculus, and bombed the AP test. That's a whole other story for another time. But the point is,
that's beside the point.
Yeah, it was just her willingness to enter into that space and not to solve it too quickly. And that's her job, we would say, as a teacher. But I just want to encourage our listeners to consider that's also the job of good leadership.
Yes.
It's also the job of good parenting. Right? In any context, right? Where we're wanting to equip others, to empower others to do things that before only we could do. But our willingness to invite people into that tension and to learn to live in it ourselves as leaders, I think is the mindset shift that if we'll embrace it. Yes, it's a little bit slower and a little messier in the beginning. But actually will yield the things we're actually looking at, which is to be able to pass on more responsibility, to delegate more responsibility to the people on our team, and actually to build an environment, a culture in which the people on our team see themselves as legitimate problem solvers. Right. Yes. And in the same way that teacher helped me build my confidence that I could solve these math problems. As leaders, we want to learn how to build the confidence of those on our team to solve the problems that they're facing. And it reminds me, Dawn, of one of my favorite books that I've ever read, which is by a gentleman named Joseph Campbell, A Hero with 1,000 Faces, and which, by the way, Donald Miller did a reiteration of that through a marketing lens, which is genius. So if anybody wants to look that up, but the Hero with 1,000 Faces basically just helps us understand this kind of archetype of the narratives of our human history, which is basically to say that there's areas of our life where we are on our hero's journey, where we're trying to learn things and overcome obstacles and challenges and grow and develop and mature and be formed more and more into the people that we aspire to be.
Yeah.
Right. So, and as leaders, we talked about already, we've already solved a lot of problems. We've had to overcome challenges. And because we've done that, we've become competent in it and the skills required to do that. Then what happens is people just look at us like, you're the hero, you're the hero, you're the hero, you're the hero. Yeah. Well, that's awesome if all we're ever going to be is the hero. But leadership is about recognizing that part of our hero's journey is then turning around to the people that are behind us to say, how can I leverage what I've learned to empower you so that you can be on your hero's journey, so that you can grow, that you can experience greater success, right? And so I think as leaders, sometimes we step into the office, into meetings, into the projects and the things we're working on, and we kind of think from the hero's perspective. What am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to accomplish? How am I going to succeed? And that's awesome. And there's always room for our hero's journey. And yet, as leaders, we also have to recognize that part of our responsibility is to turn around and recognize that we're also the guide. Mm-hmm. We're the Gandalf. We're the Mr. Miyagi. We're the Viper in Top Gun. If anybody knows that reference, I'm very, very pleased. Right? Like now we have the responsibility to, like my 8th grade pre-algebra teacher, to take some time and to engage with our team to say, hey, I want to help you be successful on your own hero's journey. But again, that's going to require that mindset shift. That's going to require the slowing down, the messier experience, and a willingness to impart to others the skills, the abilities, even the character that was required of us to get to where we are so that they have a chance to do the same.
Yeah. And it reminds me of something we often say, which is we can accomplish greater things together than we can ever do on our own. So the choice is I as a leader, I just want to keep running fast, because for sure you can run faster alone, for sure. But then you're trading that out, right? This is a well-known phrase. You're trading that out for the ability to run farther, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can go farther together, but you're going to go slower.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the question that we as leaders have to ask. Am I just going to stay the hero of my own story? Am I just going to run fast? Or am I going to make that mindset shift, look around and invite people on that journey so that we can go farther together? That's going to require me to become a guide. It's going to require me to value effectiveness over efficiency. It's going to require new things of me. And sometimes that alone is difficult for us to engage, because it's going to require us to become learners again. All right, Eric, let's talk about some real life stories. We always like to put in where we see the rubber meeting the road on these things in our personal lives, with our clients. What do you got for us?
Yeah. I've got two short examples that that came to mind as we were processing this earlier. The first one is, as most of our listeners have probably heard me say over and over again, I love to golf. I'm an avid golfer. I love it. I love the experience, the internal challenge, the internal competitiveness, the opportunity for me to constantly practice to try and get better. And I'm always competing against myself primarily. But as my son's gotten older, he eventually realized, hey, Dad, it'd probably be good if I picked up golf. And I was like, son, that's awesome. It's great for business, networking. You'll never regret learning how to play this game. Teaches you a lot about character and life and all kinds of fun stuff. But I very quickly realized that where I was in my journey of golf and where my son is at the beginning of his journey in golf are very different. Mm-hmm. And so when we'd go out to the driving range, normally I would go out and I'm really focused on what I'm going to practice, what I'm going to do, and the drills I'm going to run through. And I'm focused on me, my hero's journey of becoming a better golfer. But now that my son started accompanying me to the driving range, I actually have to slow down.
Yes.
And I have to actually take time to spend with him and to help him assess his golf swing and help him work through his frustrations and help him. And I'm like, I'm not having time for myself. And how am I going to get what I want to get done? And then we started going to the golf course and actually, trying to get out there and get a few holes in. And I realized I'm used to getting out there and playing. All I'm thinking about is my golf game and what I'm trying to achieve and how I'm trying to score and my experience. But now I'm having to spend time considering his experience. I can't move as quickly. I have to slow down, let him hit maybe an extra ball sometimes. I have to talk him through different things. I have to talk him off the ledge because every other swing, he's like, this sucks. I can't do it. I'm, miserable. So, and it's just a reminder, a fresh reminder in this season, right? Not just in the business space, but as I want to be a great leader with my kids, I want to help them feel empowered on their hero's journey. He wants to learn how to play golf. I'm excited for him, but it has required a lot of slowing down, what feels far less efficient use of my time, and it's very messy. It's very, very messy. So that's one fun example of where I'm having to practice this real time with my son. But here's the cool thing. Here's what I have to remind. I tell him this, but I'm really reminding myself more and more. Son, but as you get better and as you get more comfortable, then you and I could travel together and go on golf trips and spend more time together doing this. It could be our little hobby together. And then if you come work for me, which he does, he wants to come work with me. I'm like, then I can take you on trips because I golf a lot when I go on trips with our clients and stuff. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm having to remind myself of the vision for where we could get to. And again, it's that whole, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, you got to go together. But going together does, like you said, it's a powerful insight. It requires that we slow down and that we're willing to play the guide to other people's hero's journey. The other example is, I am limited in my time, energy, and resource and how much coaching I can do. And I know I'm a really good coach and I know I have a powerful impact in and of myself. But my vision, my mission for this coaching business is so much bigger than anything I could do by myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so part of one of my responsibilities, and that you've started to share in, as well as we've got to train other coaches.
Yep.
And so what I often find myself doing is the temptation is, when you or any of our other coaches comes with a particular problem or a question or a challenge they're facing as they're working through our toolkit or they're working with their own clients, is, I have so much experience, so much learning that I have accumulated over the years. And yet very often, because I need to get to another meeting or I need to get to another task, I'm like, it'd be so much easier if I just told Don what to do or what to say or how to handle this situation, right? Rather than slowing down and practicing curiosity and inviting you and myself into that tension of like, okay, this is a challenge. This is no big deal. This is good. This is an opportunity for you to stretch some of your muscles and for me to play the guide and not the hero. And so to ask those questions, hey, Don, help me understand. So explain the challenge as you see it. Help me understand it. Break it down. How are you interpreting that particular challenge? How are you understanding it? I'm curious. What are your thoughts about how you might be able to solve this, or what's the right next play? Even to the point where I'll say, hey, what do you think I would say to you in this moment, right? Or what would you say to some of the other coaches that you're training? It's just this real exercise of slowing down, being patient, and me recognizing that those are opportunities for you to grow and develop and to exercise those muscles. Because what it does, and here's what I've learned over the years, is the more I help somebody else solve their own problems, that means they have ownership over the solution and the outcome, and then they feel a greater confidence to recalibrate when necessary. This is actually no different than what we do with our clients, right? We don't want to solve their problems.
That's right.
Right? It's the whole, I can feed you a piece of fish for the night, or I can teach you how to fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so our coaching philosophy, our methodology, how we train our coaches is completely predicated on this mentality of, now you're the hero and I need to play the guide. Okay, so how do I invite you into that tension and partner with you, guide you, ask the appropriate questions? I might offer some thoughts here and there. I might make recommendations, but at the end of the day, the transference of responsibility only happens once I say, hey, at the end of the day, I can process this with you, but this is ultimately something that you're going to have to make a decision about. You're going to have to make a plan. You're going to have to act on it. You're going to have to learn from the outcomes, and you'll learn from that as well and move forward. But that's where the transference of responsibility, this is why you said earlier, our kids are still, we're still doing their laundry when they're 18. It's because most likely, not in all cases, but a lot of times it's like the kids struggle. They messed up the clothes. They put the colors in with the whites. They didn't pull the gum out of their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened, they left the clothes in the wash for 3 or 4 days and it's all mildewed. These are all real stories of what happens in my household.
100%.
Right. So we just, I can solve that problem. I'll just do it for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the transference of responsibility only happens through the process that we're talking about.
That's right. Yeah. And two things came up for me in that when you were telling that story. It requires a vision because it's harder than doing it ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I have to have an external vision that is motivating me to do something harder than just figuring it out myself.
Yep.
I need a vision for why I'm teaching my son to play golf. I need a vision for why I'm training my team. I need a vision for why I'm building up coaches and making them, because on the other end of it, being on the receiving end of that type of leadership, gosh darn it, I wish you would just solve my problems for me.
I know.
It'd be easier all around if you just tell me what to do and solve the problem. And yet, that doesn't build the capacity in me. That doesn't help me become that version of myself that I'm fighting for. And so it really does require an intentionality from us as leaders to say, man, sure, everybody might be happier in the short run if we as leaders just solve all the problems.
Yeah. Yeah. The favorite words of one of my former mentors, I'd bring him a question, hey, that's a great question. What do you think? Yeah. I didn't come here to hear myself think out loud. I already know what I think.
I
want to know what you think. I want to know what you think. But here's the genius in what he was doing was that he was training me. Hey, this is something you need to learn how to do. Now, he would help. He would offer insights. He would, if I looked like I was going to run off the edge of a cliff, he'd say, hey, you know what? Probably don't go in that direction. That might not be a helpful way to think about this. Let me offer a different perspective. He was careful. There was a lot of guidance there, right? But the guidance was always with the purpose of calling me to do the wrestling, to own that tension, and to develop those skills.
That's right. That's good.
What about for you? What's a real life story for you?
Right. So right now, my son is about to turn 16 in 6 weeks.
Oh, goody.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And I had a real clear vision of him getting this driver's license because, as I've mentioned before on here, he is an avid fisherman. We live about 30 minutes from the coast. He works on a sport boat that requires him to be down at the coast at 4 a.m. So I have a real clear vision.
Hold on. You mean you don't want to have to take him at 4 a.m. every single time? Come on, Dawn. Isn't that what good mothers do?
I have a real clear vision of sleeping in on Saturdays. I have a real strong vision of not waking up at 3:30 in the morning. So the vision is crystal clear. However, then that required us as a family to build into him the capacity to learn how to drive himself. And, he had to do the tests and he had to take, do the studying and then take the test and then go behind the wheel training. And at some point, right, I have to say, okay, son, take the wheel of the car.
Oh Lord, that sounds so much like Jesus. Take the wheel.
There was a lot of praying that happened in those moments as well. Yeah. Right. But there's a very practical moment that I have to say, okay, you've studied, you've learned, you've done all the things. And at some point you actually have to get behind the wheel. And yes, that is a terrifying moment. It's this, I would say, not any more stressful than when we build up our business. We've created this baby and now we're going to hand over the wheel of certain aspects of that to people on our team. It can be really scary. And yet we're never going to achieve that vision of me sleeping in on Saturday mornings past 3:30 in the morning unless I can get to the point of being intentional about training him and putting him behind the wheel and then saying, okay, we're going to, with boundaries, we're going to drive around the neighborhood. And then we're going to try to get on the freeway, Lord help us. And then we're going to try to drive in the fast lane. You know what I mean? There is a very clear intentionality, developmental process that we're engaging in so that we build the capacity for him to be able to drive himself, which is ultimately the goal. And initially, it is a heavy lift. Initially, there's a lot of emotion and fear and anxiety. But ultimately, the payoff is I get a heck of a lot more time back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you would agree with this. But I love that you differentiated. There's a clear vision of interest for you and for your husband, right? That your children develop a level of independence that does not require for you to constantly do everything for them. There's also a vision for them, right? A vision of independence for your son, a sense that he's accomplished something. It's a coming of age of sorts in our culture. There's this sense that he's achieved some level of responsibility, as scary as all that might be. There's a really clear vision, both for you as the leader, the benefits for you as a leader, as well as for your son, which is really rad.
That's right.
I love it. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We started this in the last episode. We're going to do it again this week. In this episode, we're going to take just a few moments to pause and ask this question. Whatever you're doing, if you're on the treadmill, skiing down a slope, surfing the waves of the coast, whatever you're doing, driving along slumberly on your way to or from work, we want to encourage you to pause and to simply ask this question. If there was only one thing that you could remember and take away with you from this podcast episode, what would that be? We're going to give you 15 to 20 seconds just to reflect on that, because what I know as human beings is that you as the listener don't start thinking until we stop talking, or unless you tune us out halfway through the podcast and your brain goes somewhere else. So we want to give you an intentional bit of time to think, what's the one takeaway? What's the one insight, the one learning, the one thing that you want to put in your pocket, take with you that you might integrate into your life and leadership? 15 to 20 seconds, and then Don will close us up.
All right. Well, if you are listening to this and realizing that you are the bottleneck in your organization because you don't give your team the opportunity they need to grow in the tension, then we'd like to invite you to join us for our monthly masterclass, where we unpack these ideas even more deeply. We give you the opportunity for Q&A, and we would love to see you there. You can get to our masterclasses by visiting MPWR coaching/masterclass, or scroll down to the show notes and you'll find a link there. We'd love to have you join us.
Yes. Can't wait to see you in the masterclass. And if you know someone who is struggling to pass on responsibility, to play the guide to somebody else's hero's journey, then we want to encourage you to share this episode. We'd also strongly recommend you go all the way back to season 1 of our podcast. Those first 10 or so episodes really unpack our core leadership toolkit that will give you an even deeper perspective and more practical handles on how to address the challenges that we've been talking about today. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.